Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me to welcome Senator Kennedy to our campus. It's a great pleasure to welcome all of you to today's Carl Taylor Compton Lecture. In a moment, I will introduce this afternoon's very distinguished speaker. But to put today's lecture into context, I want to begin with a few words about the Compton Lecture series. The Compton Lectures were established in 1957 to honor one of my predecessors, the late Carl Taylor Compton, who served as president of MIT from 1930 to 1948, and then as chairman of the MIT Corporation from 1948 to 1954. Carl Taylor Compton was one of the truly great figures of MIT's history. His legacy lives on here in more ways than I could ever mention today. We still at MIT and around the nation and the world benefit from his pioneering commitment to the integration of the physical sciences with engineering. That convergence between the physical sciences and engineering was, of course, accelerated by the investments that the federal government made during World War II, where radar was developed here at MIT, and, of course, was then played out in the modern electronics, information, and computer industries. From a different perspective, last fall, we welcomed President Compton's great-granddaughter, Holly Bellaccio, who is here with us this afternoon as an MIT freshman. Holly, where are you? There you are. Great. The Compton Lectures are the oldest, best known, and I would say perhaps the most distinguished of MIT's lectureships. From its inception, the goal of these series has been, and I want to quote from the founding charter, to bring to MIT some of the great minds on the world scene. And over the 5 decades, since the great physicist Niels Bohr gave the first of the Compton Lectures, these lectures have brought to MIT figures of the highest national and international distinction in science, in technology, in public affairs, in education, and in the arts. Our speaker this afternoon, the Honorable Senator Edward M. Kennedy, continues this history of exceptional Compton lecturers. I will not begin to attempt to rehearse the full details of the senator's exceptional public career, but I would remind you that Senator Kennedy is now the second most senior member in the United States Senate, having served a total of 43 years and having won election to 7 full terms. The senator, in concert with his late brothers, has helped to set a new standard by example of commitment to public service in this country. The senator has been an eloquent and effective advocate for the causes he believes in. And fortunately for us, those causes include many that resonate with the work of MIT and in the tradition of the Compton Lectures. His tireless efforts on behalf of education, of research, and innovation reflect Senator Kennedy's driving focus on the future. Senator Kennedy has consistently sought to broaden access to education. He chairs the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. This committee has broad legislative jurisdiction over issues of education and workforce development, ranging from Head Start and No Child Left Behind to higher education and student financial assistance. Over the course of his legislative career, Senator Kennedy has worked tirelessly to expand America's talent pool by bringing more members of underrepresented groups into higher education and into math and science in particular. He has played a critical role in the development of many programs in this vein, including the Javits Fellowships for a graduate study in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, teacher loan forgiveness programs, which credit teaching in low-income schools or vital subject areas as payment toward federal student loans, and the federal TRIO programs, which motivate and support students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Senator Kennedy has also played a critical role in the development of policies that support research and innovation. His committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, also has jurisdiction over health policy and funding, and the senator has vigorously supported funding for research and development, understanding the important role universities can play as centers of innovation. And the senator has coupled his support for research with a long-standing commitment to help transfer the brilliant ideas that are generated at American universities into the marketplace, where they drive economic growth and improve our quality of life. Senator Kennedy's work on the Small Business Innovation and Research Program in 1976 pioneered the establishment of government policies to foster technology transfer to small companies and startups. In addition to the senator's strong commitment to education, research, and innovation, I have to mention one more reason we're particularly pleased to have him with us this afternoon. I hope many of you have heard of the Kennedy Scholarships. These scholarships bring graduate students from the United Kingdom to study at MIT and Harvard. And this year, we're marking the 40th anniversary of the program. The program was established by a national appeal within Britain to honor the late President John F. Kennedy. The Kennedy Scholarship offers exceptional students unique opportunities to broaden their intellectual and personal horizons in ways that are now more important than ever in our era that is defined by global interaction. Kennedy scholars have gone on to remarkable careers on both sides of the Atlantic, and it is MIT's great privilege to have 4 of them as senior faculty members here at MIT. Senator Kennedy has long been a devoted supporter of this wonderful program, which so fittingly honors the memory of his late brother. So it gives me enormous pleasure to report that earlier today, President Bach of Harvard and I communicated to the Senator that our 2 universities have committed to expand this important living memorial to President Kennedy by raising endowments to support an additional 2 scholars on each of our campuses for the future. Now, I've already mentioned the Senator's focus on the future, and I have no doubt that his reflections this afternoon will inspire each of us in our own aspirations to a life dedicated to improving the world around us. Please join me in extending the warmest possible welcome to this spring's Compton Lecturer, the Honorable Senator Edward M. Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Hochfeld, for that extremely kind and generous introduction, inviting me to be a part of the Carl Taylor Compton Special Lecture Series. I'm deeply honored for that opportunity, and I want to thank you as well for all of your help and assistance that you've given to the United States Senate in understanding more completely the importance of research and development, that a nation investment in terms of the research and development, not only something which is so basic here at this great university, but so important for us as a country and a nation, our economy, our national security, our future in terms of a world economy. All of us in the United States Senate have been very appreciative of the time that you've spent and the way that you've gone around and met with us and talked with us and helped us better understand the challenges that we're facing. And it's always nice to be with a president that I can agree with, as much as I do with the president. I was listening to President Hochfeld talk about the time that I've been in the United States Senate. I remembered when I first ran for the United States Senate, I was 30 years old. I said at that time that what the United States Senate needed was a young person with new ideas and idealism. And the last time I ran, just last fall, I said there's nothing like age and experience to count, whichever works. I was coming in the hall, and someone came up to me and grabbed a hold of my shoulder, rushed by and said, "Has anyone told you that you look like Ted Kennedy?" And I said, yes, they have. And they said, it must make you mad as hell, doesn't it? So I got. In any event, I'm proud to be here. I'm honored, as President Hochfeld said just a little while ago. We had a wonderful celebration of the announcement of these Kennedy Scholars. When President Kennedy was in college at Harvard in 1939, he took the senior springtime off. He was interested and committed to politics and history, And when he was over in Great Britain, he met a wonderful friend, a made a marvelous friend, David Ormsby Gore, who was later the ambassador from Great Britain to the United States. And they formed an incredible relationship. They had a magnificent friendship. And I think there never was a better relationship that existed between Britain and the United States. I mentioned to some of the trustees that are here, Emma Rothschild, who's the head of the trust, and others who have been part of the trust. One of the most touching moments that I've had, really, and I think in my life, was when I went over to ask Harold Macmillan, who had been prime minister when President Kennedy was president. And I spoke to Harold Macmillan and asked him to do this introduction of my brother Bob's book. This was in the early 1960s, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, on 13 days. And Harold Macmillan, after our lunch, went over to a small room, and in there were these cabinets, and he pulled out October 1962, and he had 10 or 15 pages of handwritten notes on every page. Beautiful notes on it. You could have just taken those out and printed them in a book at that time. But he said the significance was that the fact at the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, he called President Kennedy and asked him to send someone over to declassify the notes, or to cross out the parts that were sensitive to American security. And President Kennedy said, your security is the same as our security. And he had written these lines down. And he said was the basis of the friendship and the basis of the relationship. And it really is an indication about what can be in terms of nations, and certainly it is with regards to the United States and Britain today. I was doing my little oral history about the time that I'm in the United States Senate. When I first arrived in the United States Senate, I went over to listen to this debate that was taking place over there. I thought, well, I'll listen to the debate, make my mind up. I don't have to read memoranda around these. I'll just make my mind up listening to the debate. So I listened to a fellow from Virginia. His name was Willis Robertson. And he spoke very eloquently and passionately about this issue, in favor of this issue. And I was persuaded. And the time came to vote. They said, call the roll. And they came, Kennedy, of course, comes before Robertson, and Kennedy and I. And then they came to Robertson, and he voted no. And that kind of surprised me a bit. And I went up to Willis afterwards, and I said, Senator, I just arrived here. I listened to your speech, and I heard your vote. And he said, Senator, my state of Virginia, people are evenly divided. Those that favor the issue, I send my speech. Those that are opposed, I send my vote. And I said, is that the way I went to that reception that evening, and we had Senator Green, who was from our neighboring state of Rhode Island, very elderly gentleman, and he was at this reception, and I saw him reach in his pocket and pull out this little card. Most of us have it sort of your schedule, and I said, Senator Green, I'm Ted Kennedy, I'm a new senator. And that's nice, he said. And I said, are you looking at your schedule to find out where you're going? And he said, no, I'm looking at the schedule to find out where I am right now. And so it's a lot truer today, perhaps, isn't it? Let me begin with one premise, and afterwards respond to some of the questions that you might have. But let me begin with one premise I'm sure we can all agree on, that MIT reflects the best traditions of our country. That's been true from its beginning. In 1859, Governor Nathaniel Banks proposed that the state donate land for education. A citizens' committee, led by William Barton Rogers, proposed an Institute of Technology because, they said, material prosperity and intellectual advancement are inseparably associated. They also believed in what they called the happy influence of scientific culture on the industry and civilization of nations. The founders of this great university understood that the spirit of scientific inquiry could serve a model for a more enlightened age. And the result of their vision has been a remarkable century and a half of leadership by MIT in producing scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs who have changed the world. The political leaders who founded this university embraced progress. They valued independent academic inquiry. They believed that politics should be influenced and informed by science, not the other way around. They knew that a strong society must be an educated society. They understood that the never-ending effort to form a more perfect union would always require a restless spirit that asks new questions and is not afraid of the answers. Ah, the good old days. Today, it often seems that we live in less enlightened times than those that gave birth to MIT. We see governmental officials who reject independent academic inquiry. We find people in power who believe that political advantage and not scientific truth should inform public policy. We see leaders who undermine the human quest for knowledge by insisting that we stop asking questions and blindly follow the leader instead. With this warped philosophy of government, truth is taking a beating. In fact, one aide to President Bush scoffed at those of us who are still part of what he called the reality-based community, because we, foolishly, believe that solutions emerge from the judicious study of discernible reality. That's not the way the world really works anymore, he explained. Instead, and I'm still quoting here, when we act, we create our own reality. That kind of skewed thinking has spread like a cancer in our current administration, infecting every policy decision that they make. Tragically and dangerously, the administration has developed a pattern and practice of ignoring or manipulating facts to achieve a desired political result. But no matter how hard they try to create this pseudoscience and pseudo-reality, in the long run, they will not succeed. The reality-based community is alive and well, and we're fighting back. Just 2 days ago, I was proud to cast my vote in the United States Senate again in support of embryonic stem cell research and the hope it brings to millions of Americans. Yet this important research has been crippled for nearly 6 years by an administration with a policy that is flawed and, frankly, nonsensical. I want to say at the outset that I understand and deeply respect the religious and moral opposition that some have to stem cell research. But in my view, that's not what we're talking about here. When you look closely, the administration's stem cell policy pays lip service to those concerns, but it does not truly reflect them. The administration would have us believe that their policy stems from a moral concern with the use of embryonic stem cells. But their actual policy allows federal funding for stem cell lines that were created before August 9th, 2001. Moreover, the administration does not seek to outlaw stem cell research. It doesn't seek to close down fertility clinics. It doesn't seek to stop the fertilization and disposal of eggs in a laboratory. It just opposes the federal funding of stem cell research lines created since August 9th, 2001. And what's the scientific or moral significance of that date? Nothing. It's simply the date the president first addressed the nation on the subject of stem cell research. Without question, the United States is being put at a serious competitive disadvantage by failing to expand federal-funded research in this area. Our medical research capabilities have been the envy of the world, but we'll be left out and left behind if we don't aggressively continue to explore this new frontier. As Prime Minister Tony Blair said last year, if America does not want stem cell research, we do. And so do countless other countries who see the promise of this research and understand, as the founders of MIT did, that intellectual advancement and material prosperity are inseparable. A strong majority in Congress favors federal support for stem cell research, but as of today, we do not have the votes to override the President's veto. So we look to you and applaud the commitment you've made through Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research. And we look to the Commonwealth and applaud the commitment that Governor Patrick has expressed. And we look to other states and institutions that have made that commitment. But we all understand that to be truly competitive, we need the leadership, the financial resources of the federal government. And we need federal leaders who do not allow political posturing to restrict scientific progress. In addition to preventing new breakthroughs in medical research, this administration has blocked patients from accessing existing treatments. The most stark example of this intrusion is found in the FDA's consideration of the over-the-counter sales of the emergency contraceptive pill, Plan B. In 2003, the FDA's professional staff recommended approval of over-the-counter sales of this drug. The relevant FDA Scientific Advisory Committee also voted overwhelmingly that Plan B was safe and effective for women of all ages. But the White House allowed a narrow minority in its right-wing base to drown out this scientific consensus. And it was not until August of 2006 that the FDA finally approved over-the-counter sales of Plan B. We should not have been surprised by this attack on the use of science to help family planning. 2 days after he was inaugurated, President Bush signed an executive order banning federal funds from going to international family planning groups that offer information about abortion. This action has been followed by years of derailing and defunding efforts to improve international family planning, despite its enormous potential to improve the health and the lives of those in the developing world. The threat to scientific progress is not limited to medical research and treatment. Look, for example, at global warming. There is a strong consensus that global warming is being accelerated by the burning of fossil fuels. But with the backing of its cronies in the oil and gas industry, the administration decided to create its own reality on global warming. And we now know from whistleblowers and investigators that scientific conclusions that did not match the administration's political agenda have either been rewritten or ignored. As James Hansen, director of the NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York, and an early voice on climate change, recently told us, "In my more than 3 decades in government, I've never seen anything approaching the degree to which information flows from scientists to the public have been screened and controlled as it is now." That process involved allowing former oil industry lobbyists employed by the White House to edit EPA documents about global warming before they were released. A House committee found earlier this year that those edits weakened critical conclusions about the scope and the causes of global change. They even deleted the statement that such changes are likely mostly the result of human activities. The Office of Management and Budget then insisted that these scientific documents need balance because global climate change has beneficial effects as well as adverse impacts. But proving yet again the old adage that you can't fool all of the people all of the time, the Supreme Court just last week rejected the administration's arguments for failing to regulate CO2 emissions, citing incontrovertible scientific evidence that greenhouse gases are contributing to global climate change. This is by no means the end of the story, but it is an enormous victory. There are countless additional examples of the politicization of science. In just this morning's New York Times, Paul Krugman reports that a presidential appointee of NASA told a website designer to add the word theory after every mention of the Big Bang, to leave open the possibility of intelligent design by a creator. The president himself has supported the teaching of intelligent design in our public schools, notwithstanding the enormous weight of scientific evidence against it. Unfortunately, we are fighting the war on truth on many fronts, not just those public policy debates directly affected by science. The war in Iraq is perhaps the most prominent example. In September 2002, 33 international security scholars, among them 4 MIT professors, representing some of the best minds in the world, signed a letter to the New York Times explaining why war with Iraq would prove to be disastrous. I agreed with them and proud to have spoken out and voted against the war from the beginning. As I've often said, it's the best vote I've cast in 44 years in the United States Senate. But as we now know, even before the vote in Congress, President Bush had decided to go to war with Iraq, and the administration officials were busily collecting and twisting information to support that decision. According to the confidential memo written by a member of the British government in July 2002, fully 8 months before we invaded Iraq, Bush wanted to remove Saddam through military action. The intelligence and facts were being fixed around that policy. Just as with stem cell research and global warming, the decision to go to war was made first, and the facts were retooled to support it. Those in the intelligence community or armed forces who refused to go along were ignored or fired, and too few in Congress asked questions or tested the administration's assertions against available intelligence or the actual testimony of the generals who appeared before Congress. Perhaps most egregiously, the administration's political operation encouraged candidates to use the war as a political tool, attacking the patriotism of those who oppose the war or the administration's rosy view of the situation on the ground. This manipulation of our intelligence and political institutions has resulted in tragedy of unspeakable proportions. Mission accomplished has become mission impossible, and yet the administration and its supporters continue to ignore the reality of a bloody civil war being fought before their very eyes. Fortunately, the American people and a bipartisan majority of both houses of Congress are facing reality and insisting that we begin to withdraw from Iraq. Over and over again, in the past 6 years, we have seen the triumph of politics over public policy. We've seen it at the Department of Justice, which has gone from being a bulwark of independence to being a political tool. We've seen it when the mining industry executive was placed in charge of worker safety at the Mine Safety and Health Administration. We've seen it when the lobbyist for the companies who manufacture a consumer product is named a head, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the list goes on. This manipulation of governmental institutions for political gain not only breeds cynicism and erodes trust, but it also threatens the very foundations of our democracy. But there is an antidote for this poison, and you've got it here at MIT. You understand that the answer to unquestioning uncertainty is not absolute certainty of our own, but a questioning spirit that seeks to find and follow the truth. The opportunity for investigation and innovation is what attracts so many students and researchers to MIT each year. It's the idea that a major breakthrough, a revolutionary discovery, or a new vision of society is just around the corner. It's the idea that your intellect can be harnessed to make life better for others. That same kind of spirit is what attracts people to politics and public service. It's the belief in the power of an individual to make a difference. It's the willingness to persevere and to work through complex issues. It is the ability to understand and build on all that we have inherited from those who came before us. As both politicians and scientists know, difficult issues are not solved in weeks or months or even years. They are often the work of a lifetime. That is why I so deeply regret the lost opportunities of the last 6 years. But I also have great hope for the years just ahead. In Washington, we have begun to insist again on policies that are rooted in reality rather than ideology. And I know that MIT will be our partner in making science and public policy partners once again. Together, we will return to the great traditions that were at the heart of the founding of MIT a century and a half ago. At that very time, Alfred Lord Tennyson was giving voice to the spirit that we must reclaim today, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Thank you very much. Good. Good. Thank you. Good. I'd be glad to maybe answer a few questions. I might tell you what happened to me one other time that I asked whether there were any questions. And this was going back to the time of my brother's campaign, and I went out to Montana in his behalf, and I talked to a group of Democrats in Montana, Butte, Montana, and the fellow that was running the meeting said there's some farmers down the road, and they're going to send some delegates to the convention. You ought to go down there too, so make the speech. So I went down and I made the talk, and I had always noticed my brother would make the talk. He'd always ask whether there were questions, so I thought I'd try the same thing. I said, are there any questions? And a hand went up in the back of the room saying, how does your brother stand on 90% of parity for wheat on controlled acreage? And I had absolutely no idea, and I still don't know what the answer to that one is. Anybody from Montana here? Can tell me. But I remembered a story that happened that my brother told. Before he went out to the Pacific in PT boats, he was in naval intelligence, and he went to a factory in South Carolina, and he was telling the workers in the factory that if they saw a fire in the factory, they ought to determine the origin of the fire in order to determine how to extinguish it. If the fire was made from wood, you want to put water on it, but you never want to put water on an oil and gas fire or electric fire because they can spread and have disastrous results. So he finished talking, and he asked whether there were any questions, and a hand went up in the back of the room and said, Ensign Kennedy, if we see a fire in the back of the factory, how are we going to know, just by looking at it, whether it's made from wood, oil and gas, or electricity, so we'll know exactly what to put on it and what not to put on it? And my brother said, that's a very good question, and there'll be someone here next week who'll talk on that very subject. But anyway, if there are, maybe for just a few moments, if there were some questions, we'd be glad to. I guess there's a mic here and over there. Or you can raise your hand if I can hear you. I'll say it. Yes, sir.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on No Child Left Behind, if that was a good public policy initiative, and if you think it will outlive the current administration.
Yeah. The No Child Left Behind bill was the successor of what was passed in 1965. 1965, this country said that very poor children were going to be a national priority that we're going to do something about. That was under the President Johnson at that time, and it was a national commitment. It was called Title I, and that had been extended and extended and extended. And then when President Bush came in, he said, there's questions about whether this has been an effective program. We ought to try the No Child Left Behind. There is one overarching and essential aspect which is the basis of the No Child Left Behind, and that is that every child in America has the capacity and the capability of given the kind of support to move ahead in terms of proficiency. The basic concept of this idea was the state will decide the curriculum. Number one. Two, you'd have smaller class sizes. Three, you're going to have a well-trained teacher. Fourth, you're going to try and survey or test a child to find out if they're keeping up or falling back in terms of their academic progress. And if they are falling back, they are going to get supplementary services. And finally, that you're going to have parental involvement, so the parents are going to know how their children are going to make progress. Two other elements. One, there was going to be an outreach program in terms of limited English speaking to try to bring them children along, and secondly, to work with those children who have some disability. Now, that was the concept, and that's the concept that I'll support today, and I think it's a concept that makes sense. It's a concept that we're using here in Massachusetts, which has Massachusetts the number one in the country for fourth graders and eighth graders, and it's closed the gap in terms of minority more than any other state. But we got to jump on the No Child Left Behind. The problem with this is that it didn't fund the No Child Left Behind, and we've left 3.5 million children behind. I use the kind of analogy that when we said we were going to do the Medicare program, we did all the elderly people. When we had Voting Rights Act, we said we're going to do all those that are eligible for voting rights. Rhodey, we said all, we meant all. But what this administration said is we want all children to be included, and if we had been talking with this with this kind of a philosophy that the President Bush had to the space program, the astronauts would have gone to the moon, they would have landed on the moon and gotten halfway back, and that would have stopped the funding, because we've left out 3.5 million children. That is one problem. Secondly, what has been a problem is the Department of Education is more interested in labeling schools rather than giving focus and attention and priority to the neediest schools. So in some schools, children will be making substantial progress, and in another area, you might have a number of immigrants that have come in and bring down a particular group or a particular classification, and they are called a failing school. They haven't provided the funding to make sure that we're going to get the well-trained teachers. We haven't made sure that we're going to get the smaller classrooms. We haven't provided the supplementary services. And for the schools that have fallen behind, we haven't provided the help and assistance to the states so that they can recover. So the concept in terms of what you're trying to do and make a national commitment that all children, we're not just taking the total average grades of a particular schools, because what we have seen over the period of time that there are many, even if you do that, unless you break it out in terms of various subgroups, and really find out by subgroups about how all of them are moving along together, we're really not making the difference. Now, finally, as we're looking at this, the reauthorization, enormous trouble by the dropouts that are taking place. We have, in Cleveland, the poorest city in the country, we have 25,000 children every day that are dropped out. You have 170,000 children in Philadelphia. 75,000 of them don't go 30 days or more to school on it. You get the increasing number of dropouts that are going, the proliferation of guns. You have 750,000 felons that have finished their time in jail. We have 250 a month that are coming into Boston that have had no training, no rehabilitation in prison. And no matter how well-intentioned they are, the idea that they're not going back to their patterns of conduct or behavior before is unrealistic. And we refuse to do rehabilitation. We don't think that's important. Put them in jail and lock them up, extend it a few more years. Well, those years are coming. So we have social dynamite out in the major urban areas, and you add to that the increasing degree of poverty. We had poverty before, but the increasing pressure of poverty on so many of these children is breathtaking. And we can't solve it just in the education system. It's a comprehensive. It's got to be the whole 9 yards on it. And that is a recognition of something as a matter of national policy, that this is important as a matter of national policy. Because what is happening is that we're rapidly turning into a country with two different societies. I mean, John Edwards was right when he talked about what is happening, and I think that separation and expansion has been growing, and we can't cure it all with the No Child Left Behind. But let me just say we've increased the funding of the Democrats with their budget, some $4 billion. It's not nationwide. It's not going to answer all of the problems, but it is going to make a difference in the Title I. It's going to make a difference in terms of training, doing additional kind of a training program for educators. But we're still not serious about the issue which you raise, and that is the seriousness about K through 12 and education, and particularly not only in the early grades but also in the middle schools. Yes, yes, ma'am. Yeah. Questions on the 08 and how do candidates separate themselves? I think, let me just talk about my side first. I think the Democrats have an extraordinary stable of candidates. I virtually know them all, and they're all very good friends. I was with Governor Richardson the first time he ran for Congress. Joe Biden have been friends for years since he's been in there. John Edwards was on our committee. It was terrific on Judiciary Committee, and I care deeply about him. I think Barack Obama is on our committee, and he's a superstar. And Senator Clinton is as knowledgeable about issues as anyone that's around. And Chris Dodd, I think, knows about the education, foreign policy, and he's been the chairman of the Children's caucus since I've been in the Senate, and I have a great personal affection and respect for him. So I know all of these. But I think the real question is, who's going to be able to get, attract? Who's going to be able to inspire? And I think what the message from the last campaign is change. They want to change, in which they should obviously from the rubber stamp Congress, but it's what wants the public interest rather than the private interest. Want the war to end, but they also want sort of a vision for this country. People have felt we need leaders that are going to talk about where we're going and to challenge us in terms of larger kinds of visions about where this country ought to be in the world and where we ought to be in terms of our society and problems. And I think that's a good test about who's going to be able to do that and achieve it. If it's going to be business as usual, I mean, I don't care all about all these issues, and I'm always glad to hear what they have to say about them, but it's going to be the ones that's going to really be able to inspire, to uplift the country, because effectively, at the end of the day, it's going to be they're going to be the ones that will be able to set the agenda and galvanize the public to be able to get things done, whether it's in trying to deal with education or trying to deal with poverty or try to restore some of the basic protections, rights, and liberties that have been taken away in the last 6 years. Yes, sir.
Do you think our country has a moral obligation to deal with genocides? And if so, why are we so ineffectual with dealing with it?
Well, the question is, do we have a moral obligation to deal with genocide? I'd say yes. And why haven't we been dealing with it? I have stated I'd support military intervention in Darfur. I mean, I'm strongly about getting out. We are in the wrong war at the wrong place at the wrong time, and we're not going to take more time, unless you want to hear the whole 9 yards on it. But I'll give you, and said it many, many times, and will continue to say it. But I don't think it's excusable. I think the United Nations and the General Assembly, and I think the United States, I think it's absolute what Sudan is doing. There are a bunch of warlords up there, the loss of lives over that part. We got into the Balkans and got out without losing. We lost some civilian personnel, aid workers. One, Ron Brown, is a very close personal friend of mine. But with regards to the military, we didn't. I mean, we can, and I don't think, though, I think if we demonstrated some backbone on that, I think you'd get through that very, very quickly. The Chinese, of course, are up to their ears in this. We don't put we're over there working other deals with the Chinese rather than being serious about Darfur. I think it's one of the overarching and overreaching issues of our time, and the silence, I think, for all of us, including, there's an interesting divestment that's taking place in the States. You've got those that are interested in it might take a look at it. Universities are taking a look. I don't know, Susan, where MIT is and all of that, but these are issues that are taking place at the grassroots level that are very impressive. I've talked on the blogs to the a number of times to states where state legislators are working in their states in terms of a divestment. You have to get this thing right, in this right way and a wrong way of dealing with it. But those that are interested, you can either get back in touch with me, and I'll give you the people here locally in Massachusetts who are working on it. Yes, I'll take maybe two more. Yes, yeah.
My name's Jonathan Papak, and I was wondering, I hear a lot of things from personal experience about the exorbitant costs of healthcare in this country.
Yeah.
And in recent years, you hear how up to 50% of personal bankruptcies that are filed are due to medical costs. What can the Senate be doing to close that gap between what senators and representatives receive in their healthcare and what the constituents they represent don't receive?
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's the candidate. You have to make a speech. You can ask the question, and that's what it. It's one of my great frustrations. I've been for Universal. I've been a single payer since 1971, and I've been a sponsor of 12 different kind of health bills, and it always it's enormously frustrating that we haven't been able to do it. Listen to this. We spend 34 cents out of every health dollar as administrative costs. Can you imagine that? If you brought that down to 26 cents, that's another $150 billion a year you could have. Imagine that, 26 cents. If you get it down to what any of the Europeans, Canada's maybe 16 or 17, that's about $350 to $400 billion a year you save. If you look at our economic indicators, our life expectancy, our infant mortality now on this, are now we're in the middle of the industrial nations and falling, rapidly on this. And the incidence of mortality for people that don't have, you talk about a moral issue, for don't have health insurance, is rapidly rising. You can draw lines and charts and find out that the people, and it's right across it, whether it's breast cancer, lung cancer, any of the cancers, heart, any of the other parts. If you get the coverage, if you don't have it, the incidence of both detection and early treatment of it, let alone the cost and expense of it, is outrageous. It costs $24 to pass a piece of paper administratively through a hospital here in Massachusetts by paper, 3 cents if it's done on a computer, and they're going down to 1/3 of a cent. You get 1 out of 4 of the paper have mistakes on it, so it's rejected. Industry wants them rejected. They hold the money longer on this thing. They figure that in their profit aspects of it. We passed information technology that the RAND Corporation says $130 billion a year it'll save. And we got unanimous. It was NZ Kennedy Frisk Clinton last year couldn't get through the House of Representatives because it became such an issue. Nancy Johnson, and who over at the Institute of Politics, but got defeated in Connecticut. One of the reasons because she failed to get this thing. Thomas, who's out of the Congress, held it up. Barton, who's out of the Congress, also held it up over in the House of Representatives. It's scandalous. It is absolutely scandalous that we don't deal with these issues. Now, I think the states are moving. It's, Massachusetts, I'm proud that we've moved, and that it's enormously complex. It's very difficult, but they've moved, and they've made some breakthroughs in the last few days in terms of how to look at particularly middle income. They've taken up over 100,000 that are uninsured, put them on place, but it's the middle income people that they've had the more difficulty, but they've worked, you've read it in the paper here, they've been continuing to make progress. Got 23 states today that are looking at the Massachusetts model to see if they can do it. I talked to Secretary Leavitt this morning to try and see. I'm for the states trying till 2008, and then we're going to elect a president that's going to do it. That's my that's my short and long-term policy. I just wind up with this because it is amazing to me. When we're signed on, and I'll be glad to do. When we sign in for the United States Senate, we have two things. The first day, we sign our name, and then we check off a little blue box, which makes us eligible for the federal employees' health insurance. You're paying 3/4. My premium, and I have the best health insurance, is $200 a month. $200 a month. I got all my family that's covered, preventive care, I got everything that anybody could possibly imagine. $200 a month. Taxpayers are paying 3/4 of every member of Congress on it. And the idea that these members of Congress will go out, we've had the opportunity and say, let's do for the American people exactly what they do for ourselves on this kind of, oh no, we can't do this, we can't do that. We can't. This is too quick. We want the government to be running. Look what the post office. Look at look at Medicare has done. Look at the healthcare system that you've been running in the private sector on this thing. It is just absolutely outrageous. This is going to bubble up, and I think Republicans, Democrats alike, and business, finally sort of getting along. I mean, it's making us less competitive, and but it's the impact that we've had onto this thing. The good news is we're going to do the CHIP program, and we're going to reauthorize. So we're going to look into the children on it. What we should do, we do the children now with the CHIP program and Medicaid. We cover all the children up to about 18 to 20. Can do that. In Massachusetts, that's 300% of poverty. And if you look at, you got the Medicare population, then it is the other group, but it's basically those between about 52 or 3 years old and people that are holding on the Medicare that you have to cover. You could phase that in with the kind of savings that I've talked about here.
Hi,
Yeah,
Senator.
I'll just this will be the last one. Thanks.
Senator Kennedy, my name is Martin Holmes. I'm majoring in aerospace engineering, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on current U.S. space policy and the administration's efforts to return to the moon and possibly go to Mars.
Well, there'll be someone here next week who'll talk about that. I'll tell you number one, no weapons in space. No weapons in space. We can start. We can start in with that, and I hope those that are interested in it will watch this, because there are not a lot of people that are interested in it. We got budgets and appropriations that are coming down the line. We had the reshaping in the last year, reshaping weapon head. Yeah, the bunker block. Well, that's deep penetrator in terms of nuclear, but that was basically related to this. But I think the most important is the no weapons, and I'm still worried about this. I think they got started with no weapons in space in the early '60s. President Kennedy with the arms control agreement, and we've been pressing that. And there's been excuses that are being used to move it. It's the most important. I favor the space program. It's always the issue and the question about the cost between the manned space program and the what is my person? You got the word. You know what I mean. Program. And I understand it, but I basically think that it's and the kind of economic challenges you're facing. But I think it's been pretty well demonstrated. Unless you're going to have individuals that are involved in the program itself, you're not going to be able to really capture the imagination of people in this country to kind of give it the support. And I think it needs that kind of support, and we ought to continue it. And I've been, these other. I think the world has been, absolutely captured by the pictures that we've had about Mars and the questions about whether there's. Do you think there's water up there in Mars? Do you think? You know that answer to that. How many think there's water in Mars? No. But so I am for having individuals kind of in space and exploration. I believe in a vigorous play. I was never quite convinced of the space station. I found that had a lot of it. Just didn't seem to me to all add up. We spent an incredible amount of money on that, and I'm not really sure that really got us an awful lot. But with regards to other particular aspects of the program, I'm for it. Let me thank you all. I'm very glad and honored to see all of you, deeply honored to have the chance to make this lecture, and let me say what an honor it is to be your senator in the United States Senate. Thank you very much.
Well, I can see that you all have joined me in thanking the Senator for his thoughtful reflections of his life in public service, and also for articulating the importance of a reality-based community to bring science and public policy back into a powerful partnership. Senator, we are delighted to have you re-inaugurate our Compton Lecture Series. Thank you so much.